Okay, so it started recording. Is Leah in the meeting? Yeah.
Yeah, hi.
Yeah. So today, hi, I hope you're doing well, Leah. Or is it Leah or Leah?
Lea is fine.
Leah, okay. So Leah is an associate consultant at IQVIA, where she works with pharmaceutical companies on pressing challenges in drug development and commercialization. As part of IQVIA's AI/machine learning team, um, Leah leads AI/machine learning training and works on consulting projects that leverage AI/ML approaches. And today she'll be talking about AI in healthcare. I encourage all of you to think about any questions you have throughout her talk. And yeah, now I'll hand it over to Leah.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. So my name is Lea, and I have two of my colleagues on the line as well, Tom and Rahul. So Tom will be sharing his screen.
Yes, I will do, Leah. I'm getting an error here when I'm trying to share screen, saying host disabled participant screen sharing. Does anyone on the call know if they could switch that on for me?
Yeah. I think
Hi, Tom. I've just made you co-host, so you'll be able to share.
Amazing.
Thanks.
Just give me one moment. Perfect. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Great. So we can go back to introductions. All yours, Leah.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, as Abby said, we'll be talking about AI in healthcare, and yeah, there are three of us on the call. So maybe I'll let everyone introduce themselves first, and then we can jump into the presentation. So maybe we start with Rahul.
Sure. Thanks, Leah. Hi, everyone. My name is Rahul. I hope you can hear me clearly. I've been with IQVIA, or have been working in healthcare for all my career now, and have always been excited by the impact that one can create in terms of helping patients and doing something more noble than just a corporate job. And therefore, it's been a space that I've been in for all my life, and have tried to do different things in my career. It's something, a part of it, which we'll try and talk about during our presentation. Leah or Tom, you want to go next?
Want to go next?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I can go next. So I'm Tom. I'm a much earlier stage in my career than Rahul. I've recently graduated from university last year, where I studied life sciences, and I started becoming not only interested in machine learning, but also interested in healthcare systems and pharmaceuticals. And that's led me into this role at IQVIA, and you'll be hearing more from me during the presentation.
Awesome, thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Lea. I'm an associate consultant at IQVIA. I've been there for about 1.5 years now. And as Abby said in the introduction, our our role there is to help pharmaceutical companies overcome some of the biggest challenges that they face when launching drugs. My background is in biochemistry and drug discovery. And later on in the talk, Tom and myself will tell you a little bit more about our backgrounds and how we actually got to using AI in our current job. So you will get a little bit more context on that later on in the presentation. So if we go to the next slide. As I said earlier, we would like to talk about AI uses in healthcare, and healthcare is a pretty broad topic. So what we want to narrow it down to is drug development. And there are three broad questions that we will try to answer during this talk. So the first one is, how does drug development actually work? And how can AI actually help make this process a little bit more efficient? The second question would be around a use case that we actually worked on. So how can AI be used to improve patient treatment with the drugs that we have? And then finally, we want to talk about the structure of teams that work on AI. So what does an AI team actually need to be successful? So if we go to the next slide, I'll start in the first part of the presentation, and then I'll hand it over to Tom. So some of you may be familiar with the drug development process, but for those of you who are not, this is a pretty sort of lengthy process that can take between 5 to 10 years, and it's usually more closer to 10 years. And it really includes everything from from identifying a molecule that could potentially be a drug one day, up until actually using that drug in real life on patients. And it broadly has sort of four key stages. And during these stages, we're trying to answer some key questions to be able to progress. So in the first stage, in early drug discovery, we're really trying to discover, how does a disease work? What are we actually going to target in order to cure a certain disease? How are we going to screen a lot of molecules that could potentially be drugs one day, and how can we modify them to actually be better? And which one or which few molecules could potentially be the most promising? Which ones should we test further? And once we actually manage to answer some of these questions, we can progress to the next stage, which is clinical development. And in this stage, we're essentially testing some of the drugs or some of the potential drugs in clinical trials, so on actual people. And so in this stage, we're really interested in trying to understand what particular conditions can we actually treat with the drugs that we have selected? What is the best way to test these drugs? So how do we actually design these clinical trials to be able to see that a drug is safe and effective? And are there any patient groups that actually can maybe benefit more from the drug of interest? If we're super, super lucky, we would come out of this stage with one potential drug that shows real promise and is really effective in curing a certain disease or treating certain disease. And we would then progress it to the next stage, which is commercialization. And what this means is essentially making the drug available in the real world. So during this stage, we would be wondering if the drug will be approved by regulating bodies. So these are the bodies that sort of government agencies that make sure that the drugs that we use are safe. How much will the drug cost once it is on the market? And how many patients will be treated with this drug, and which patients specifically? Once the drug is actually available in the real world, of course, it's in the fourth stage and it can be used to treat patients. And so during this phase, the physicians treating the patients would, of course, want to have the ability to diagnose patients fairly quickly and accurately. But they would be wondering which treatment is the best for this particular patient. And also, when is the best time to start this treatment? And so, as you can see, the drug development process is pretty complicated. It does take a very long time. It can be very inefficient in that we can start with many potential drugs, but not really end up with many on the other side. And it can be quite costly. And so if we go to the next slide, AI has actually been really great in addressing some of these challenges that we have in the drug development process. And it's made great use in making the process more efficient, but also actually providing better treatment for patients. And so here we have just a couple of examples of companies that have come up with solutions along these different phases. So for example, in the early drug discovery, we have Baxel Therapeutics, and this is a biotech company that essentially works on identifying new drugs for oncology and neuroscience using AI. In the clinical development stage, we have Trials AI, and they essentially use AI to optimize clinical trials. So they use a lot of publicly available information to optimize protocols. to make sure that trials are done correctly, that they're fast, efficient, and also cost effective. Actually, this clinical development phase is one of the sort of riskiest and most costly part of drug development. Commercialization, I think as a good example would be us. So we actually work quite a lot with pharmaceutical companies during this stage, where we try to understand, whether a drug would be approved by regulators, what the potential price would be, and how many patients would potentially be using the drug. And AI is really, really great in helping us do this. And then finally, there are a couple of examples of companies that aid patient treatment. Path AI, which helps doctors make more accurate diagnosis. And along the similar lines, Babylon is probably a company that they already know of. So Babylon provides virtual appointments with GPs, but they have developed AI tools that actually help GPs in delivering more accurate diagnosis, triaging patients, selecting treatment, and also supporting patients. So in terms of, for example, suggesting some lifestyle tips and choices. So I'm going to hand it over to Tom now, and he will talk a little bit more about what we actually do.
Amazing, thank you, Lea. And we're going to stay with this concept of the 4 stages of drug discovery. So has anyone got any questions on these 4 stages? Anything causing confusion or any kind of interesting thoughts before we dive in a bit deeper? Awesome, okay. So in terms of where IQVIA is best placed across this set of areas, you'll see us most in these later stages of development. So we don't tend to work with companies during early drug discovery because that tends to be a more academic or scientific pursuit. You'll find us looking more at clinical development, commercialization, and patient treatment. And we've just seen a few examples of companies that are working in that space and what they do. But also down here, we have a few more specific examples of the kind of problems that we could be solving in these areas and what kind of impacts that could have for our clients and patients and different stakeholders in the healthcare business. So for example, in terms of clinical development, one really important thing could be identifying patient types who are more or less likely to respond to a certain drug. So of course, there are simple ways of understanding how different types of people will respond to a different drug. For example, their body weight or their ethnicity, or more complicated factors such as their genetics or those kind of things. And using AI to help identify these patterns and understand which patients may respond better or worse to a drug can be something that's really powerful, not just for pharmaceutical companies to know, but also for doctors and the patients themselves. And we can touch on this a little bit more in the next few slides. And to point out a few other interesting problems, diagnosing a disease can be really helped with artificial intelligence. At the moment, lots of diseases can have a long waiting period for a good diagnostic. It can be complicated to diagnose a disease, and that leads to delays for the patient in terms of receiving the best treatment as quickly as possible. And it means doctors can't provide the care they want to their patients. So maybe we could use artificial intelligence and tools in that area to help us diagnose diseases more quickly. And in terms of commercialization, of course, predicting the commercial success of a drug is something we also look at. And all of these factors are linked because, of course, if a drug commercially does well, it means it's probably very effective for patients, or we'd like to think so. So we're working across these 3 areas to get as much value as possible to patients, to the companies involved, doctors, and healthcare systems, all rolled into one. So we can have a closer look at a specific example of what we mean by using artificial intelligence to solve one of these problems. So in this case study, we're looking at trying to identify which patients would respond better or worse to a given drug. And this is a really important question for a lot of different people in the healthcare space. So of course, patients want to know whether they would respond better or worse to a drug, so they know which drug to take. Healthcare systems want to know because they can then provide patients with the best drug. And of course, doctors want to know to help make decision-making processes more quickly. So in this case, you can see on the left-hand side, we have two groups of people. And this is a classical setup in a clinical trial. We split the group of people we're going to make the test on into two, and we give the drug to half of them, and we don't give the drug to the other half of them. So we can see exactly what the effect of the drug is between the two groups. And we call this randomization because we assign people randomly between those groups. Then, of course, in the real world, we don't want to assign drugs to people randomly. We want to assign them in a clever, systematic way based on the way we think they're going to respond best to a different drug. And that's where the expertise of doctors will come in and be able to identify patterns and different types of patients that they think will respond well to a drug. But this decision can be difficult. And in this case, artificial intelligence can pick up and digest thousands of different characteristics associated with those patients, in this case represented by those boxes, different colored boxes, to try and understand which patients will respond better or worse to a drug. Like I said before, these can be a simple group of metrics like ethnicity or body weight, but it can be a much more complicated set of factors like genetic traits, or even previous disease history. So whether a person has suffered from a disease in the past can sometimes inform how they will respond in the future to a new drug. And AI is able to encapsulate that huge amount of data and look for patterns, because really that's what AI is. It's looking for patterns in data set. And that's why AI can be so powerful in this example, in terms of identifying those patients who may respond better or worse to a drug. And we can see here on the next slide the importance of solving this problem. So it's not just for patients who will respond better to a treatment. And of course, that's a good thing for them because they're one step closer to a cure, and that could be better for them and their family in terms of their quality of life. But like I said, for physicians and doctors, in terms of making better decisions, for healthcare systems, in terms of being economic and providing the most care to the most number of people, and of course, the pharmaceutical company, in terms of capitalizing on that successful drug that works in a group of people, and hopefully reinvesting some of that revenue back into clinical trial development and investigations and bringing new molecules to market in the future. And then the whole life cycle continues and healthcare takes a step forward, hopefully. So before we move away from this case study, were there any questions here on how AI kind of helped us solve this problem?
There is one question in the chat, Tom.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, how can there be patients in the control group who responded to the drug? This
is a great question. And I think this is something we raised yesterday in our internal discussions when we were looking at this slide. In this case, what we mean here in the orange is patients that would respond to the drug if they were given it in the real world. So yes, so in the control group, no one is going to respond to the drug. You can see some placebo effects, but we wouldn't expect that. But the idea here is in these random groups of people, there will be people who would respond to the drug better than others. And that's what we're trying to pick out here with our AI. But great spot, very, very good attention to detail there. Okay. So I think Lea is going to talk us a little bit through how we work and our team structures.
Yeah, so yeah, we also wanted to mention how we work. I know we had one of your teams present at IQVIA, and I noticed that every part of your team has a different role, and so it seems like you bring together a lot of different skills in order to build your product and your solution. And this is exactly what we do. So our teams have a very diverse set of skills and different strengths, and this is really important for what we do. So there are kind of two key things that we focus on. One is business knowledge, and the other is AI knowledge. So on the business side, what we want to make sure we know is to really understand the healthcare industry and what kind of challenges our clients who are pharmaceutical companies face, and how can we best apply AI to address some of these challenges. And then also we actually have to be quite good communicators. So you will probably face this as well when you're working on AI projects, and that you will talk about your products or solutions with diverse audiences. So you might talk to people with very technical backgrounds, but then you might talk and present your results to people who have no idea what you're doing. And so you really have to be able to explain really well your projects, right, to different sets of audiences. And on the other side, of course, there is more technical knowledge. So we want to make sure we understand some AI and machine learning concepts and algorithms. And of course, being familiar with programming languages helps. I think most of our team is sort of fairly proficient in Python. And then along the lines of communication, even on the technical side, it's really important to not only be able to train a model, but really demonstrate what you've done through interesting data visualization, for example, so that even technical and non-technical people can understand what you're doing. And so, not everyone will be expert in both, and that's okay. Whatever your strengths are, you would have a specific role on the team. So here on the right side, we sort of have an example of potential team members. So some of our team members would be very technical, so they would have a very specialist AI knowledge, and they would usually be in charge of implementing a solution. We might have team members who are sort of, who have kind of solid understanding of AI and also the business side. And they would usually be in charge of understanding how AI can be used to solve a particular problem. And then we might have people who are a little bit more proficient on the business side, but might not have so much technical knowledge. And that is also okay. Usually these people will play a role in communicating with clients. So they would be able to empathize with a problem that a client is facing, and they would be able to explain what we're doing to try and solve it. And so if we go to the next slide, we just wanted to quickly tell you a little bit more about our backgrounds and how we actually got to do AI and what our current roles are. So maybe I'll let Tom start.
Sure, can do. So I started off my kind of post-school studies at university studying biochemistry. Hadn't really touched on any computer science before then, had studied mathematics, but hadn't got into any coding. But then in my Masters of Research in Synthetic Biology, that's where I was exposed to that side of computer science and starting to use artificial intelligence in a real world way. And in that Masters, I had a really interesting project working in a cancer laboratory, trying to develop computer vision solutions that would automatically track cancer cells as they moved under microscopes. And that was an interesting project because we were trying to automate something that researchers do every day. So we were trying to save them time, but then also add more detail to what the human eye can just see, because the AI can look at an image, 1,000 images in a second, and see much more than a human eye can. So that was a really interesting project for me, moving more from the biochemistry space into computer science, and allowed me to pick up lots of great coding skills. And I'd really recommend anyone who has the opportunity to get on a project where they can get their hands dirty and start coding. It's a really great way to pick up some coding skills. And yeah, in terms of my project roles, I kind of use my expertise from that project to help me do a lot of the more technical side of things in our teams at IQVIA. So I'll often be coding and optimizing our machine learning models, but then also, of course, extracting and cleaning data from the databases. We have many internal databases, but also going out and searching for new external databases and thinking how we can download them and clean them up and use them to the best of our ability for our work. And then, of course, some of that communication side of things, which is going to our clients and going to also internal colleagues in our company and trying to explain what we're doing and what it means and the statistical significance behind what we do. So it's not just a wall of numbers for people, but it's something that starts to mean something. It's something they can start using in their own day-to-day decision-making processes. All yours, Lea.
Yeah, great. So I actually have a similar background to Tom, in the sense that I think I've done the exact same undergrad course as Tom did, but a few years back. But I actually chose to do a different a final project that took me on a slightly different route. So I didn't actually do anything related to AI until I joined IQVIA. So I did structural biology, and then that took me to do a PhD in drug discovery, where I tried to find sort of new drugs for cancer. And during that time, I did a little bit of computational biochemistry. So I got familiar with Python and yeah, computational biochemistry, but again, nothing AI related. I was surrounded by a lot of people who did AI, a lot of computer scientists, some of them who went on to do really, really exciting things. So I was definitely surrounded by the buzz, but I didn't really do anything myself. And after joining IQVIA, I was quite fortunate actually to join our AI team, or to be around when the AI team was forming. And so I was just really interested, and I started reading books and doing some online courses, and kind of tried to teach myself actually how to do it. And I'm still on that journey. And what's really nice, I think, about our team is that we do have people like Tom who perhaps have a little bit more technical background, but we have people like myself who don't really come from technical background, but are on their journey of learning more about AI. And so we have a little community around that as well. And so in project, my role is more on the problem solving side. So with my background in biochemistry and drug discovery, I sort of have a little bit more sort of healthcare domain expertise. And so I would think about what is the exact challenge that our clients are facing, and what is the best way to approach solving that challenge. And so I think we only have like 1 minute left. So if we just go to the last slide. Yeah, we just wanted to leave you with just a couple of last thoughts. So like I said, I know we had one of your teams present at IQVIA, and it was really great to see how you have different people with different backgrounds and different skills in a team. So we just wanted to emphasize that diversity is really a strength, and this can mean many things. Of course, it can mean diversity in terms of your background, gender, where you come from, and definitely in terms of skills. Make sure to surround yourselves with people who have different skill sets than yourself, because that is really the only way that you will succeed together. Second would be to stay curious and keep learning. I think Tom and I kind of demonstrated that you can really have different journeys, and that you can really at any time pick up new skills. And I know that you have different tracks in the accelerator, and if you picked one now, that's great, but don't let that prevent you from learning new skills in the future. So always stay curious. And finally, innovate and adapt. Whatever project you're working on currently, you're quite likely to come up with some challenges, but really use your diverse skills to think of new ways to overcome them. And we only saw one of your teams at IQVIA, and they were really amazing. And I'm pretty sure that all of you are doing amazing, and you will learn so much during the accelerator and after. And so we just wanted to wish you good luck on your journey. And thank you so much for having us today.
Thank you so much for your talk. It was very insightful. Does anyone have any questions that they want to ask? You can either unmute or put it in the chat. Yeah, there's one question in the chat.
So AI with healthcare is a little bit hard ethically. How do you deal with that? I guess it depends on what what is the context?
Well, I think
No.
the ethical question around pharmaceutical companies and revenue is a really interesting one. And I know it gets a lot in the news. You often see companies have charged too much for a drug, and that can be seen as a negative thing. It is a tricky balance to strike. I think one thing I'd say is that drug discovery, that kind of process we looked at, is a hugely expensive set of pieces that need to come together. And it's not the things that government aren't putting their money in and investing in those kind of drug discovery cycles. So it has to be pharmaceutical companies that are doing that research, and they've got to be able to recuperate the money they put into that by commercializing their products. Of course, there's the argument whether they over commercialize them and it's too expensive. But at the end of the day, whether it's expensive or not, we hope that patients are receiving care that reduces the burden of the disease on their lives. And if we can support that with AI, I think that's our goal here. But it's a good question, and it's definitely an interesting discussion to have, I think, about the healthcare system. Don't know if, Lea, you have any extra perspective there?
No, yeah, no, I agree with everything that you said. So there's another question. Can you trust AI completely with diagnosis? I guess we'd probably have different answers on this. I guess it depends on the use case and you know, what are we actually trying to diagnose. So there are some diseases that are actually, or some conditions actually, that are very complex and very difficult to diagnose even without AI. And there are perhaps some, let's say, easier ones, easier in the sense that they rely a lot on imaging. But I think in either case, I think they're mostly used as companions. So I don't think that AI would be like a standalone necessarily diagnosing tool, but it definitely helps reduce errors and speed up the process as a companion to physicians.
It reminds me of the famous AI saying, all models are wrong, some models are useful. And I think that's really applicable here in that case.
So does anyone else have any questions? If not, I actually have a question. It's kind of a more technical question, but so all this AI that you're using, you mentioned that it works on patterns in past data. How is it trained to do so? Are there neural networks behind it? So I think in self-driving cars, there's a particular type of neural network. For this type of AI that you use, are there special types of neural networks that train this AI?
It's a really great question. For us, so there, like you said, there's lots of different types of AI and machine learning, and neural networks definitely one of those. Neural networks work really well on huge data sets with millions of examples. So for self-driving cars, they've been supplied with millions of examples of a tree and told this is a tree, and they've learned from that. For us, the number of drugs in a healthcare market, for example, or the number of characteristics in a patient can be much smaller. So we tend to stay away from neural networks and use something more like decision trees, which you may have come across. It's a slightly different way of training a model to make a prediction. In terms of how they learn from that previous data, it's all about the way we run the training script. So we're using something called supervised learning. So we present the model with an example, a historical example, and we also give it the answer to the question. So we say, this is the patient and they did respond to the drug, or this is the patient and they didn't respond to the drug. And then the job of the AI in the training scripts is to link what was it about the patient that meant they did or didn't respond to the drug. And those are kind of training scripts that kind of underpin a lot of machine learning. And for us, like I said, it's decision trees rather than neural networks. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it definitely did. And just another quick one, if I can just ask it really quick. So right now we have weak AI, which is just kind of designed for one task and one situation only. In the future, if strong AI becomes if it becomes a bigger thing, then so as an AI that's more self-aware and can develop its emotions, do you think that would be more beneficial in cases such as used to be used in healthcare when treating patients, or do you think it should be humans that should be doing the diagnosing or making difficult decisions, such as if a patient is lacking in capacity, would you allow AI, strong AI, if that becomes a thing, to do that, or do you think it should be left to the humans?
Another really interesting question, and a very philosophical one, I must say. I think AI is a tool, right? And we're developing AI to supplement our own emotional expertise and also scientific expertise. And I don't think, I mean, from my perspective, I don't see AI ever replacing the bedside manner of a doctor and a human face, and the way humans have that huge range of emotional intelligence. And AI really is only as strong as the way we interpret it, and that comes from us as human beings. For me, I don't see it replacing us in that way. I don't know.
Can I
if you would disagree? You're going to disagree, Lea? Interesting. Go on.
I just read a really, really interesting article about how basically we're developing essentially like AI therapists. So yeah. So I think, yeah, I think there are definitely developments in the area, and I'm not sure if I agree or disagree with it. Like, I'm not sure if that would be like better or not, but I think it's definitely interesting that that is a possibility. I'm not sure if that would necessarily replace human contact, as Tom said, but I think it's definitely exciting to see how we can expand the use of AI even in the kind of I guess emotional intelligence space. I think it would be really exciting to see.
Just to add to that, right? And linking this with an earlier question of how do you link AI with ethics. So there would be a point where AI would become better at decision making, but then where do you draw the line of taking tough calls? Because AI would be data driven, and as Lea and Tom was saying, not emotionally driven. So that's where probably the human touch would still remain, even if AI becomes really, really good at almost every part of healthcare right now.
Yeah. It was interesting to listen to all your different opinions on this. And thank you so much for your talk. Does anyone have any last questions? If not, we'll end it there. No, I don't see any more questions in the chat. So yeah, thank you for your talk today. And yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.